This episode is brought to you by Monk Drums. Monk Drums is a creative desert venture that strives to combine beauty and business as one heartbeat. Monk Drums' main focus is handcrafted wooden drums that allow us to love, assist, and serve all who accompany us on this path. Use the coupon code FERMENTPOD to get 5% off your Monk Drums order. Find them on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Monk Drums, and every Monday look for hashtag Monk Drum Monday. Speaking from personal experience, monk drums are wonderfully crafted and they sound amazing. They blend the best traits of both the djembe and the cajon, and I found them to be incredibly versatile in both the live and studio environment. Check them out at monkdrums.com. This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, and new songs are being added all the time. Songs from Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. Visit them at worshipteam.com today for a free trial. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com. You're listening to the Ferment Podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Tina Colón Williams. Tina is an accomplished vocalist, worship pastor, and immigration attorney. We have a special bonus at the end of the podcast, Tina singing a Christmas carol medley from Vineyard Worship's recent EP, Humble King.
All right, and we're live. Hey, everybody. I am with a very special guest today. One of my favorite singers in the whole world, Tina Williams, is with me today. Say hello, Tina.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, all right. Welcome to the Ferment Podcast. Just so you already know this clearly, but just so that all of our guests know this, in case this is the first episode you're listening to, the Ferment Podcast is really a conversation about worship and spiritual transformation. And so we're just going to be exploring like those themes a little bit today. And really excited to do that with you. But before we maybe get into that, Tina, like I know you're a singer, and I think a lot of people in the Vineyard know that you are this just boss lady singer. But I'm afraid that a lot of people don't know lots of other parts of your life. Mm-hmm. So why don't you just fill us in on like who you are, where you live, what you do, and a little bit about what's happening right now. And then we'll maybe jump off of that.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. I don't really think of myself primarily as a singer, though I do a fair amount of singing. I'll start with church world. I serve as the worship pastor of the Elm City Vineyard Church. I've been doing that for around 8 years now, which is crazy to say. But I serve there along with my husband, who now serves as the lead pastor there. And that's in New Haven, Connecticut. But for that, I was a student. I went to school at Yale University, studied political science, ethnicity, race, and migration, then decided to go to law school at University of Connecticut. So now my day job is actually as a lawyer. I work as a humanitarian immigration lawyer, and I do removal defense immigration work.
Oh my gosh.
Part-time, somehow.
How do you do that part-time in this political climate?
It's challenging. So flexibility is key. So some weeks it's got to be full-time, but other weeks I do things like take the whole week off and go to, Speculator, New York for a Vineyard Worship Leaders retreat, which is where I am.
By the way, for those of you who are listening, we're in Speculator, New York right now. I don't know where we're at. It's all pine trees.
Deep woods.
Deep woods. That's right. So how do you balance all that?
Sometimes I don't.
Because I know you're a mama as well.
So that was going to be the third sort of aspect of my current identity, which is as a mom, which is new for me. I mean, the last worship leaders retreat that I went to was about a year ago, and I was a week away from giving birth. So this is brand new. She's almost a year old. Her name is Zoe. She's super sweet. She's with me here. But I have this sort of, I know a lot of people talk about being bivocational. I guess I'm trivocational with ministry and this call to law and doing social justice work and also being a mom, which is not really fitting neatly into either of those two categories.
It doesn't, does it?
Right. Yeah, amazing. It's everything. It's all over.
Well, high fives to you straight up.
Thanks.
Okay. Hey, before we even get maybe to the center of the podcast, I'm really interested in your social justice work as a lawyer.
Yes.
Okay. How did you get there?
It's interesting. It started with ministry. Okay. So I, in college, was not sure what I wanted to be when I grow up, as I'm sure many people can relate to. But
it's funny how much pressure we feel, right? It's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Right.
What are you going to do? When are you going to decide?
Right. And then I think it can feel even more intense in this region in the Northeast, especially in some of the more high-powered colleges, like the school that I went to. Everybody was always doing something fabulous. So for the summer, what are you doing? Oh, I started a nonprofit this summer. What did you do? You're like, well, I was at home. So one summer I joined up with this organization that did ministry work in inner city San Francisco with kids who were in gangs. And so we basically did Bible studies, one Bible study on Wednesday night for one gang, and then another Bible study on Thursday night for the rival gang, because you can't have them together because they're rival gangs. But another thing that this group would go visit kids who were in juvenile detention who didn't speak English. So it was a lot of Spanish-speaking volunteers. Most of those folks are actually immigrants. Some of them were undocumented immigrants. And we would visit the kids who didn't speak English, all of whom were also undocumented immigrants who came here by themselves. And so that was my 101 to the U.S. immigration system.
And so that just got in your heart?
Yeah, I heard some horror stories and saw sort of, I guess, what I saw in the context of ministry was how laws were dictating what people's experience of life and sort of shrinking what they could see and how they could live. But most of those folks didn't have people who could navigate them through it. So didn't really understand what was happening to them, even in the criminal process some of these kids were in.
So talk to me about that. How was the law like pushing people in these ways?
So, for example, a lot of the kids would come here and they would stay with an uncle or something like that. But they would be in school, but they would also want to work. But they wouldn't be able to work legally. They're like 17-year-old, but they don't have work authorization because they're not here. So they, fall in with a crowd that is giving them work illegally to sell drugs. And so they get involved with that. And the uncle, the uncle that they're staying with, gets sick and then they have to go to the emergency room, but they can't get healthcare because they're not able to do so. And so, and then when they violate the law, the criminal law, then they have probation and they have all these rules and regulations. And if they mess up, then they get back into the system and then they're stuck in jail. And just in all these myriad of ways, the law was dictating, their daily lived experience.
And the law was making them more of a criminal.
Right,
unnecessarily.
Right. It punishes you for the things that you've already, but then they were coming in vulnerable because of the law, because there was no way that they could come legally, given the economic, status of their family. And what was mind-blowing was that a lot of these folks went here, even though they were deep in the legal system and on all sorts of trouble, they all confirmed that being here was still much better than where they were coming from. And
Isn't
they were
that
glad
amazing?
that they came. So seeing that, I was sort of like, wow, it seems that to even access some of these spaces, to advocate for these folks and be with them, you can't even be in the courtroom and speak on their behalf unless you have a law degree. So that's why I started to think about going to law school.
And what year were you?
I was a sophomore in college, so I was like 18 or 19.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. One summer.
Right, one summer. And I wavered in that decision. So I applied to law school, I got in, and then I withdrew. I wasn't sure if that's actually what I wanted to do. It took my sweet time, but eventually decided that, okay, this is something that I could do maybe.
Yeah. And has that been rewarding?
Tremendously rewarding and tremendously frustrating.
Yeah. Okay. Talk to me about, let's start with frustrating part first, and then we'll go to reward. What's frustrating?
So I guess comparing law to ministry, thinking of the two side by side, in ministry, you're operating out of this theology of abundance, I guess. Like you're thinking limitlessly. You're working with the kingdom of God, the powers of heaven. That's sort of the playing field. So anything is possible. You can dream big, and that's okay. It's encouraged. And that's sort of what you're walking with people through. In law, it is not so abundant. I mean, as a lawyer, you can only advocate within the bounds of what's already been done and what's already set.
Mm-hmm. Precedent.
Right. Precedent, and also like the governing law. So before working in where I'm working now, I actually used to work for a judge. And as a judge, you can only apply the law that exists. You can't even argue for something that's too far afield. It's what is the law? That's what we're applying. You apply the law to the facts, the end. So as a lawyer, even if you're, on the edgiest side of the law and trying to be creative and think outside the box, you're limited by what does the law say?
Yes.
That's what you're enforcing. And so it's frustrating because if you're doing legal work in order to advocate for people who are oppressed or who are experiencing struggle, and you want them to find the fullness that you might find in the kingdom, but you want them to find it here and now within, materially. But the playing field you're in is just, what does the law say?
Yeah.
In immigration world, especially, the laws, there's not much wiggle room there.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating because then you go to court and you're saying, I want this person to have this, benefit or this relief from removal, but they technically don't qualify, or technically because, yes, they're persecuted and they fear death in Honduras, but not for the right reasons. They don't qualify for asylum, so they're just going to have to go back. It's just what the law says. And so there's only so much you can do.
So, yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it could feel like I'm pushing a stone uphill.
Sure. Yeah. And sometimes, especially these days, it feels like the stone is getting bigger.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah. But at least you're with people, right?
Yeah. And that's where I see the kingdom flourishing, even in this frustrating field. You're with people.
Is that the good stuff?
I think sometimes that's the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
Even after someone goes to court, has a whole trial, and then because of the law is what it is, their case gets denied. And then they're facing not very many great options.
Yeah.
You're still with people, and you know that they didn't have to go through that alone.
Yeah.
And when they were telling their heartbreaking story of trauma in their home country, they had somebody with them who heard that story, who gave dignity to that story, who honored them throughout and made sure that they felt seen and not like an invisible non-person.
Yeah.
And that matters too.
Yeah.
So even in this oppressive sort of legal environment, in joining people in that journey, I think it's still sort of a way of resisting darkness, I guess. And
I think it is.
representing
I mean,
hope.
I think you even used the word advocate a
Yeah.
moment ago.
Mhm.
And that's one of the words for the Holy Spirit?
Right.
The advocate.
Exactly. You see, I think even in legal work, I've seen how the Spirit can accompany people as an advocate and also as a comforter, right? Because it's a very stressful. Anytime anyone's involved with anything legal, it's stressful, even if it's a good thing. Buying a house, it's stressful.
Yeah. We've bought a few houses, and it seems like we were signing it's like, do they own our soul now? All those pieces of paper.
It's a lot.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay. So the frustrating part is like just the parameters of the law. The consolation is to just be with people and know that you're doing the work of the Spirit. I'm wondering also if the frustrating part is just the parameters of the law, or the law not addressing the needs maybe that are existing in our country right now. I'm wondering if you've ever thought of getting on the other side of the law and writing the law. Have you ever thought of running for office and becoming?
Oh Lord, it's too stressful.
Yeah, not your lane, huh?
No, the closest I came was working for a judge,
Okay.
where my job was to help write the legal opinion.
Yes.
So technically, you're writing the law that becomes precedent, and that's
Yeah. what
everybody else has to follow.
Yeah.
So
That was as close.
no, this is close, but you still are bound by what's been done before and
Yeah.
what can be done, and
Got
it's just really just applying the law.
Okay. How many years have you been doing this now?
I have been an actual grown-up person lawyer since graduating law school in 2014. But I was doing different kinds of work before. So I worked actually for a corporate law firm, which is very different than my natural expression of self. So I did litigation, doing defensive litigation for
Wow.
corporations, but also some immigration work, but on the business immigration side. So like if you are in a company, you need to hire a new executive from London, I would help you. And so did that for a couple of years, and I worked for a judge for a year and a half, and then I took a little break to have a baby, and now I'm doing this work only since March of 2018.
Okay. I would love it if you could tell us could you tell me like one great story like from being a lawyer that's like, oh, this like was the ultimate high five moment for me. Like I knew I was in my sweet spot. I know I'm putting you a little bit on the spot there, but
Yes.
I just have this feeling that maybe there's a moment where you were in your sweet spot helping someone you knew.
A little
Gosh,
bit. So
yeah.
there's in especially these. So I'll give a recent story. So in recent months, if you've been following immigration law,
I have.
like doing that.
I mean, not immigration law, but
right. There's all the different changes.
Yeah, taking the temperature of our country.
It's getting
Yes.
crazy.
Yes,
so,
it is.
In the mix of all this, there's a lot of random decisions that will pop up and change everything from, one day to the next. And immigration courts are really slow. So sometimes your court case is scheduled for years in the future. And so we had one case in particular. The first task I had for my new job, one of the first tasks was to write a brief for this case that I knew from the beginning was a lost cause. We were applying for something that would actually allow this person who was undocumented and was about to be deported to get relief and to eventually get a green card and become a citizen. This really narrow form of relief, if you can prove super severe hardship to a citizen, and his kid had special needs, and so he qualified, except this very technical thing. He was out of the country too long and came back. Like, it just literally legally cannot. And so my job was to write the argument that he should. I wrote the argument. I knew as I was writing the argument, this is bound to fail. He will be deported at this next hearing. This is going to suck. So we did it. We went forward. The week before the hearing, a Supreme Court case comes out that is not directly related. But there's this legal argument that we could maybe possibly make that the whole proceeding should be thrown away because there's a technical defect in how you start these proceedings that there's an argument that could be made that the whole thing, it started the wrong way because there was a defect in the paper. So we should just cancel the whole thing. So boldly, we went to New York City and I, made my first oral argument in court for this job. And I argued, Your Honor, I think that actually, she was prepared to give a decision. I said, Your Honor, I have a quick argument to make. I think we should just terminate these removal proceedings and let them, because I think there was a Supreme Court decision. And while it's technically, not about this context, I think it could be argued that, and you could see a little smile across her face because this woman, you could see it in her eye. I mean, you're limited by the law, right? She wanted to let this guy stay.
She was sympathetic.
Yeah. I mean, this kid has special needs and then he's the father. Like,
yes, there's
no need. But the law says she had to let him go. And so this was the one little window.
Come on.
Where, he could, this was the little bitty avenue that we had. Because another alternative we were arguing, there was an opinion by Jeff Sessions that just took that option away. So it was like getting narrower and narrower. This was the only way. And so she granted it. She terminated the proceedings. He was no longer being deported. We celebrated. We had snacks. It was really great. 2 weeks later, she issues a letter reopening the case saying, okay, there's a lot of disagreement about how this law can be interpreted. We have to have another hearing.
Yeah.
And this was, we were feeling a little bit hopeless again. So I went there again, was prepared to make the argument. Before I said a word, she issued her denial, unfortunately. And it's like a bittersweet story. So she denied our request. She had reopened the proceedings and she had every legal authority to order his removal that very day.
Yeah.
And she, in a strange turn of events, was like, all right, I'm going to give you one more hearing. Looks like the next available date, oh man, this calendar's really full. The next available date is March 2022. We'll see you in 2022. And the government is like, Your Honor, you already had the hearing. Why do we need another hearing? She's like, well, who knows what the law will be in 2022? And then we went home.
That's kind of an awesome story though, right?
Right?
Yeah. I mean, your first oral arguments in front of this powerful judge in New York City, and you win, then you get called back and you get denied, but the judge has some sort of moral fiber in there that is sympathetic to the needs of the least and the lowly.
Yup.
I'll take it. I count that as a win. That's a win.
Right. Within the limits of what can sometimes feel like an oppressive law, there's the little bits of resistance you can give.
Yeah. No,
so I got to be part of it.
That's a win, dude. Huh. That's a total win. Hey, I want to maybe shift gears here a little bit now. And like I was saying at the beginning, kind of one of the main themes that runs through our podcast is the idea of spiritual transformation. That's why we call it the ferment. And I'd be just very interested in any story that you'd like to share that is kind of in the vein of, I was this and then something happened or something got in my life and then I changed or something changed in my life.
Yeah.
Like, I'd love to hear a story of transformation from you. Yeah.
Sure. It's interesting thinking about this topic because I am a big fan of stories. Like I love reading fiction. I read all of the time.
Okay. What's your favorite book?
Oh my God. There's so many.
Is there one?
There might not be.
Okay. A favorite book. We'll just do that real quick as an interjection.
See, even then, just recently I read a book called Homegoing.
Okay.
By Ya Gyasi. Yagyasi.
That's just fun to say.
Yeah. I think she's a Ghanaian author and she writes a these stories about these different generations of two twins, one of whom was sold into slavery and one wasn't.
Yeah. And she just keeps following them?
Yeah, generation to generation, kid after kid, and to the present. It's a really good book.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go, kids. You
Quick
have
plug.
you quick plug, and you have some reading.
Some winter reading.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but you're just thinking about that story,
right? So thinking about, I love stories, and as someone who loves books and stories, I can really love a good dramatic story, and so part of me wants to have a really good examples of some really dramatic. From one day to the next, I'm a new person. I once was this, but now I'm this because of a one-time miracle. And I've heard so many powerful testimonies that are like that, and they just always remind me of how powerful and amazing God is. I think that sometimes in the nitty-gritty day-to-day life, transformation doesn't always feel like that, in my experience.
Yeah.
What comes to mind for me is actually this practice. I don't remember when I picked this up, but something that I've been doing for the past few years. Every New Year's Eve, I try and read all my journals from the year before.
Yeah.
So
are you a journaler?
I'm a big journaler.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're a processor.
I'm a processor in writing, more so than an external processor. So, but I will sit down and take the time to read through all my journals from the year before, and it's interesting. Every year that I've done this, it's an interesting process because I start reading my journals and it's very disheartening because I start reading and I'm like, wow, all the things that I found so difficult that I'm struggling with, all my sin issues from the past year are the same. I keep circling, back to the same issues. And so I start this process and I'm like, I haven't changed at all. I'm just stuck. But as I read, even just reading my journal entries from the beginning of the year to the end, every year I surprise myself by the time I reach the end because I don't realize that I'm changing, but I am. And when I go back and I see, even just the way that I take in hardship, the way that I process difficulty, I can see myself maturing on the page.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, I give, praise to God because I am growing.
Yeah.
Even if I'm growing what feels like a spiral, like going deeper and deeper in circles, but still moving,
Yeah.
So when I think of transformation in my life, honestly, it sometimes feels like that. It feels slow and steady and imperceptible. But when you look back and then you can see how far you've come. And so, and then in that vein, there's tons of ways that I've changed over the years that, like, looking back, I'm shocked by what God has brought me through, even if it doesn't feel like a lightning bolt, miracle moment. So one thing that comes to mind is when I look back at who I was, even just a few years ago, I think of a young woman who was petrified by this feeling, like a feeling of being convinced somewhere deep down in my gut, that I am failing, like at everything that I do.
Just in general?
Just in general. There's just this kind of this gnawing thing that's within me that, I'm pretty sure that everyone around me is disappointed because they know that I am actually failing, but I am pretending to not be failing. So then there's this pressure to make sure that the world can somehow be fooled into believing that I have things together, but this like convinced feeling in my soul that I don't, and that the things that I am doing are not enough, and that someday everyone will see that I'm really failing. And maybe this comes from being someone who has always had a lot on her plate, even, fresh out of college, trying to be a worship pastor, but also working, and then going to law school and working and being a worship pastor, and juggling multiple worlds and juggling multiple roles can feel like, okay, yeah, this is cool. I'm doing it. This is easy breezy. But on the inside, I suck at this. I don't know what I'm doing. And nobody's really helping me do this well. And I'm pretty sure everyone's disappointed because they know that I'm failing. They know I'm going to screw up. And so that gnawing belief that, like, I am failing and others might see it, and that's not good. And that's not a fun feeling to live with.
It's not. It's funny to me that this would be the words that you'd be saying. I mean, it's not like I know you well, but if I was ever going to choose a word to apply to Tina, it would not be failure. I would maybe pull the words high capacity, because you feel like a high capacity person to me.
Yeah.
But on the inside,
who knows? Yeah, it's funny how the enemy works, right?
Yeah.
They might take the thing that is actually your greatest strength and make it feel like it's your biggest weakness, right? So maybe my high capacity self, like what seems to others as a glowing success, on the inside to me can feel like I am literally on the verge of dropping everything and breaking it all to pieces, and everyone will know at the end of the day that I was not the right person to do this in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? So high capacity maybe, but also operating way beyond my capacity maybe also, you know, outside of what I can really do, and everyone will find out. And so I honestly think this feeling is something I've heard echoes of in a lot of my friends. And I think this is something probably a lot of women struggle with. Just this idea of, you know, this message that is given to us through all sorts of mechanisms that we don't even notice, that we're not enough. As we are, like, just existing, like, no, that's not enough. You know, we need to like work harder to do more and be better, because when we screw up, there's not mercy for that. Like, and I know a lot of moms feel this way, that if something doesn't go exactly right, like you're a failure as a mom, you know, or like if you don't look the right way, then you're failing. You need to work harder to do better and work, you know.
Where do you think those feelings, thoughts, or messages come from?
Everywhere. I think everywhere. I think there's a lot of ways I think our culture isn't merciful and doesn't leave room for people to be messy. You know, we expect excellence, and even the American narrative. Oh, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. You know, I am the self-made person.
And isn't it interesting? Oh, that one right there. That one gets me a little bit, because it's like, every time you read about someone who's like really, quote unquote, crushed it, oftentimes what you find out is they were born on third and they thought they hit a triple. That's the way my father would say it. You know, it's like there were 30 other factors.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. But yeah, I think sometimes there's a pressure just in the water, you know, to act like you have it all together. And maybe it hits heavy. I'm sure it hits heavy on everyone, I'm sure, but for women more, just because there's more things that we often are expected to juggle. Like, you got to be especially if you're a working mom, right? Like a mastermind at home, and you got to be great, you know, at what you do, and you just have to not complain too much, because otherwise you're being dramatic. And so yeah, I think there's all sorts of ways we internalize pressure, and I know that I've fallen prey to that tons of times.
Yeah, and so you've read your journals though, and you're beginning to see some change.
It's funny, like, and the change is not necessarily, I think the change is different than what I would have wanted. I think when I think about the stuff that I have struggled with in my life, right? Feeling this bent towards shame, like being quick to feel ashamed that I'm not doing well enough, or not doing enough, or not handling my life well enough, and surely others will find out, this idea. The fix to it that I think would be most preferable to me is that I just get better. Yeah. Right? Like, ideally.
I'm sorry to laugh, but that's of course that's it, right? I don't actually want to change on the inside.
Sure.
I just want to get better.
Just get better. Like, if I feel like a failure as a worship pastor, for example, because I'm leading all these people who are older than me and better than me and more organized than me and more present to ministry than me, because they're not doing a cajillion other things, then the solution to that is just to be a better worship pastor, right? I can just be more confident, be more mature, be more free, be more organized, be more of a like bold leader with confident words and inspiring that doesn't mess up on things. That's the solution, just to be better. So I think with the struggle I was in, it'd be great if the transformation had been in my capacity, right? To be more awesome. And then you don't struggle with guilt or failure or shame anymore, because I'm just a better, more awesome person. But
I so resonate with this. I just so resonate with this, because you eventually, I mean, that's part of what it means to be a human being, right? It's human beings by nature have limited capacity.
Yes.
You can only be so strong, so smart, there's only 24 hours in a day. You can only work so much.
Yeah.
We only have so many years.
Yep.
Yeah. So more capacity that's not healthy. It's actually not the answer, is it?
It's not who we are.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, now that you mentioned that idea of us as humans inherently having limited capacity, And it's only really coming to mind now. As I'm thinking about what sort of was behind some of the sloughing off of these guilt-laden mindsets, part of what helped me along the journey was actually coming to grips with my own limitations when I got pregnant. So during my pregnancy was when I was working for a judge, right? So I was in this super high-powered job. I was super busy. I pulled more all-nighters in that job than I did all through college and law school combined. I was working really hard and, pastoring hard and doing occasional gigs in New Haven and New York City. Like I was all over the place doing way too much. And I was getting increasingly large and increasingly.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Baby's healthy. That's right.
But I was exhausted. Yeah. So every day I found that I was taking like a 30-minute nap at my desk with like the door kind of cracked, trying to act like I'm working. I could not. Like, so while as much as I would wanted to put pressure on myself to just do better, do more, as my pregnancy progressed, I realized like I can't do more. Actually, I can only do less. I can only like just come to grips with the fact that my body cannot. I cannot.
That's it.
And so that coming to grips with my own limits, I think was probably part of what God has been using to grow me out of this mindset slowly but surely.
That's wonderful, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that is spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
To wake up to your own capacity.
Yeah. So when I think of what is the end point, which I'm clearly not, I'm not there yet, but the end point that I'm headed towards and have been on this journey towards is instead of, the journey of transformation being one where I just get better at everything. I think the journey of transformation for me has been one where I am learning to accept who I am in the eyes of God, which is as enough, right?
Beloved.
Just beloved and enough. And including that, right? Accepting that, you know what? I'm not good at a lot of the things I'm doing. I'm not the greatest. I'm not capable. I'm not put together. I'm actually very scatterbrained and forgetful in 1,000,001 ways. Maybe I'm not good enough at the things that are on my plate all of the time, but I am enough, right? So
That's
even
right.
if I'm not good enough, as good as I would want to be, right? I am most certainly enough, and increasingly becoming comfortable just accepting my own limitations with my capacity, with my time, and with my skill, and embodying the space that I'm in with the confidence that comes not from being awesome, but from being loved.
Amen. That's so beautiful. I think that's really, really beautiful. And even going back to what you were saying a moment ago of like reading your journal and realizing that in the course of a year, things change. It's like imperceptible. And dealing especially with these big emotions of like guilt or shame or like just confronting your own capacity. These are all ideas that are deeply connected even with sort of the controlling metaphor for this podcast, which is fermentation. I think I told you, like, my family and I, we make wine. Yeah. Okay, so when we come in and we bring the grapes in from the vineyard and we crush them, and there'll be the mash in this big macro bin. It's like a big container, and it's all in there. And then my brother-in-law, Justin, will add the yeast into the mash. Well, the yeast disappears. And you could look at that for the next 10 hours, and it looks like nothing is happening.
Yeah.
Right? But something is happening. But you just didn't know it, right?
Yep.
And then you come back a day and a half later, and the thing is like boiling with something,
That's good.
Yeah. I think there's just a lot of the spiritual journey where it's like the beginning phases of it or the dailiness of it or dealing especially with things like guilt and shame and pressure. Oh my gosh, that's the slow process of like soul fermentation. So, how are you now? Like, you're a mom, your baby's a year old, you're doing law stuff? Like, are you settling into a new rhythm?
Yeah. It's funny. I was scared to have kids for a while. A little
Scared. Why?
bit. Well, I think part of what I thought, honestly, was that, I mean, I've always been someone who's juggled multiple balls in the air. I think because I have a multifaceted calling, right? It's to do ministry. I think that's part of what I'm called to do, but it also is there's this justice urge in me that will not be satisfied if I don't do something like in the practical side. I think that's where the law comes in for me. There's this thing with music that's a little bit different than the general call to ministry. So there's this multifaceted calling that I've had, and I've always been a busy lady. So I think I'd been thinking about children as yet another ball to juggle. How in the world do you do that? I got to drop one ball to pick up the kid ball. And like, how do I keep those in the air? And I think the process of motherhood has been a really grounding one for me, where I don't think my daughter is a ball in the air that I'm juggling.
Yeah.
I think there's this sort of centering and slowing of identity that I've had to step into with this sacred task of keeping a life alive and cultivating life in my home. And that has been a really like grounding one for me and really helpful in putting into perspective and order all the other things that I have going on. So technically, I currently have more going on than I ever have, right? I am more busy with more intense work to do on a day-to-day level. This immigration job is new for me. So there's more high stakes. There's like more stressful situations. You'd think it'd be a breeding ground for some of the same stuff that I've been struggling with, of feeling like I'm failing and feeling like I'm not enough and feeling unworthy. But I think it really is a testament to God's slow and steady transformative work in my heart, combined with this unique sacred stage of life that he's brought me into, that I don't feel the same despair at myself, but more I can sort of, I don't know, like there's more of a sense that I know in a more settled and deep place in my soul who I am, and who I am in relation to God, which is itty bitty tiny, one little small piece in this whole thing. And so, yeah, where it feels like there's chaos, or where it feels like things aren't working out, or I'm not really operating as my best self, there feels like I'm more clear on the perspective here, that I'm not the central actor of the story. So I can be a bit of a mess, and I can be a bit of a failure, and I can sit and cry and weep and not feel ashamed that that's where I am.
Isn't it amazing how motherhood or the addition of children to a family, it just reorders everything else?
I think so.
I think so. I mean, that's been my experience too.
For
And
sure.
that's what I'm hearing in what you're saying.
Yeah. It just puts in, even though, I mean, I'm working in a job right now that could very well control all of the time of my life. Like I could sit up at night thinking and worrying about everything, but there's just something magical and sacred about having a little person in your home, like a little life that you're cultivating. And it throws it all into perspective.
And I know that as I've interacted, or like our paths have crossed this last year in particular, because we've been at some meetings together or whatever. This is just my opinion, but when I've seen like you and Josh and Zoe, there's been real joy. Like, I think that's the word I would use to describe like at least like just the appearance of what's going on with you guys. And that doesn't mean I know it's challenging. I remember one meeting in particular where I know you were really challenged, but there was just this other part that just felt like joyful.
I'm having so much fun. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that like this current season of life has been super wonderful and magical. I think there is something about children that draws out this wonder. I mean, you see how kids are absorbing the world through these eyes of wonder, and like everything is new and everything is magical. And like Zoe will stare at a chain link fence and be like, "This is amazing. What is this?"
It's just unlimited curiosity. Right.
Everything is a wonder, and
it's new.
It's true. I mean, the world is a mess, yes, and we suck as humans, yes, but it's also wonderful.
Yeah, it's not the only truth.
Right. Yeah. And so I think kids are helpful because they remind us of that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to maybe shift gears again here.
Mhm.
You and I were chatting before we turned the little podcast recorder on a few moments ago. We were just talking about you as a powerful female worship leader. And
Mhm.
I would just love for you to say whatever you want to say, maybe to the women worship leaders in our movement,
Yeah.
but not just in the Vineyard either, because there's going to be lots of non-Vineyard people who listen to
Gotcha.
this. And
Gotcha.
what would you say to women who are leading worship, maybe who are coming up or who are in a worship leading job? Like, is there a word of encouragement or something from your own history that you could just you could give that I just clearly cannot give?
Sure.
Yeah, it's so needed, I think.
Yeah. Lady worship leaders out there everywhere.
That's right.
Listen to me. I think what comes to mind right now, if there's one thing I would want to say, it's that I would encourage us to not be afraid to occupy our voice. Like fully occupy your voice and take up space. I think there's something that happens, this dynamic that we don't even notice. And I as I was, coming up as a worship leader and leading worship in more spaces, not just our church, but sometimes, in like regional vineyard things, I would notice that my number one instinct is to let me try to make sure I'm not taking up too much space or get out of the way. And there's this sort of question in the back of my mind that would entertain, I think, for a little too long, of, I don't know if I'm overstepping. I don't know if I'm not sure. And so in that place of uncertainty about whether I can really occupy a space or occupy my voice, would make myself smaller than I need to be. And I think this is a dynamic I see in women in various spaces that are more male dominated.
Yeah.
I know every movement is different. So some worship movements, the worship leaders are not mostly male. I know in Vineyard, I feel like it can feel like there's a lot more bros.
Mhm.
We're the ones
I
with
would
the
say we're
most,
probably a little bro-ish.
probably a little broy, like
We
a
are.
little leans broy.
It leans bro.
And then and I know in several any space of power, not just worship leading, it is a space of power. You're commanding authority over a room and telling people how to sing to God. But any spaces of power, I think, can tend to feel more male dominated. So in those spaces, it's a dynamic I've seen, whether it's in church or in like the corporate law world.
Yeah, you are clearly there.
The women in those spaces can make themselves a little bit smaller. And I think there's some harm that we take on when we do that, when we make ourselves smaller to try to, make sure we're not, we're getting out of the way. I think we miss out on giving all that God has put within us, the deposits that God has put within us to give. And this is something, honestly, I still struggle with this in plenty of spaces of my life, including worship leading. But I think that's been a journey God has had me on, is encouraging me to freely occupy my voice, freely like bring all of myself to a space, and then sit in and use the authority that I have. So as a worship leader, as worship leaders, we have tremendous authority in a space. And I think that God would have us not be afraid to use it, and like not be afraid to take up room, not be afraid to tell people in the room what to do, and not be afraid to occupy your voice and the distinctness of your voice. And for those who know me, I mean, multi-ethnic worship is something that I've been passionate about. It's part of my story. And I think when I think about why, I think one reason, not the only reason, but one reason is because of that conviction I think I'm starting to have more and more, that it's important to occupy the distinctness of your voice and then give it, right? So if someone's natural expression of music is, it sounds a certain kind of way, but you're like, oh, but the dominant voice feels different. So maybe I shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't sing the way that I sing, or maybe I shouldn't, lead the way that I would want to lead, but try to mold it to fit the space to make more room for whatever the dominant thing is. I think that's something women do all the time in all sorts of ways. And there's an invitation, I think, for female leaders especially, everybody, but female leaders especially, to boldly bring yourself to a space and be there and lead from who you are, knowing that you have gifts and you are, you have
It's
an
needed.
authority. Yeah.
It's just needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that when So for years at my church,
Mm-hmm.
Hannah Doherty Despain was the worship leader.
Mm-hmm.
And she still leads worship at our church, but
Mm-hmm.
not as often. And now there's a lot of other female leaders and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that so before that, I was the worship leader. And I led worship there for 9 years. And I led a lot of worship.
Yeah.
And then Hannah came after me. I became the lead pastor, and I hired Hannah. And I know that when she came in, just the only way I know to describe it is just female energy.
Mm-hmm.
Woo, is that woo-woo? I don't know. Maybe. But just female energy, the interjection of female energy, it transformed the worship culture at our church. And it got so much better.
Nice.
And I don't even think it was like classic female adjectives either. It wasn't even about tenderness or mercy or
Just
compassion.
gentleness, yeah.
Because Hannah's kind of like a fireball, you know? But it was female energy.
Mm-hmm.
And she did that thing you're talking about of like occupying your space.
Yeah.
So important. I've seen you do this so many times, and it's needed. It's needed. So I
Yeah.
deeply resonate with that
Good.
with that word.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm like speaking to myself a lot because I still feel that temptation, to just like, let me just make myself small. I'm not so sure. But yeah, I think
Tina, don't do that.
we have a lot.
Don't do that. Yeah, come on.
Us lady leaders have a lot to give.
Yeah, that's so true.
Mhm.
Okay, hey, last question.
Mhm.
This is the question I've been asking everyone on the podcast,
Mm.
and I purposely don't tell anyone beforehand.
Rude.
Yeah, rude. So rude.
Mhm.
Talk to me about a time you experienced just like overwhelming joy. And it doesn't even have to be the most joy. It could just be a time. It could be recent, or it could be like historic. It could be any moment. It could even be silly. It doesn't even have to be important. But just a time you experienced tremendous joy.
So I am someone. I feel like I have a special relationship to joy in terms of
Okay.
all the feelings out there, like
Okay.
spiritual forces.
Yeah.
Joy is something, I don't know. I just really resonate with the scripture that talks about like the joy of the Lord is my strength.
Yeah.
Like, I think joy is really helpful to me.
Yeah.
And I think I grab onto it in a lot of ways. And so I think, well, as much as I'm digging in my mind right now for like a really epic story.
Yeah.
I like deeply enjoy food. Like,
No, that is
you know,
awesome. Yes.
like
Are you kidding me?
the last time, like there was this one time, I really love key lime pie. I'm from Florida originally.
Okay.
And I really love key lime pie, and you can't find it in Connecticut. And this one time, Josh, like, I don't know where he went, but he found a key lime pie. It was a key lime pie. It was good key lime pie.
In
He's like,
Connecticut?
yeah, somewhere. And he gave it to me, and he's like, look, I got your key lime pie.
Yeah.
And it was overjoyed. It was amazing. And then I took a bite,
Yeah.
and it was so delicious.
Yes.
And all I could do was like sing the praises of this key lime pie because it
Come
was
on.
awesome.
Come on.
And I regularly feel overwhelming joy when I eat delicious things.
I think that is great.
You know,
Come
perhaps
on.
even more marvelous because I don't really know how to cook. So whenever other people make things and I
Okay.
eat it and it's so good, I'm like, God is good. He made these things.
Yeah.
And they are delicious.
And key lime pie is like your love language.
Key lime pie is like my love language. And then like Josh found one.
That's a great
Isn't that
story.
nice?
No, that's a great story. I love that story.
I kept thinking of all these times I'm like exclaiming the glories of food. I'm like,
yeah.
those I feel really joyful when I eat delicious things.
Yeah. I'll just wrap with this. A few weeks ago, Heather and I were in Maine, and we accidentally went into this little restaurant,
Mhm.
and we sat down and we thought, we'll just have a drink and an appetizer. We're not very hungry. And they brought us our drinks and an app, and the little bartender guy quickly discerned that we were really enjoying ourselves. And so he brought out free dishes from the kitchen.
What?
Yeah, he's like, from the chef, and he puts them out, and it was like exquisite,
That's awesome.
And then all of a sudden, Heather and I we realized that we're in this moment. It's like a Holy Spirit Jesus bubble of like the affections and joy of God or whatever.
Mhm.
And we are laughing and at the same time like coming into contact with our own tenderness.
Yeah.
But the context was food.
There you go.
So I'm a believer.
Yeah.
All
It's a
right.
place people come together over food.
That's right.
It's enjoyable.
Come on.
Yeah.
Tina, let's do this again.
Sure.
Let's do this again. Hey, I hope you guys will go on to iTunes or Spotify and check out Vineyard Soul 1 and 2, because you can hear Tina bringing it, and I think you'd be blessed. All right, let's do this again.
Thanks.
Bye.
Hey, everybody, this is Casey Corum, the producer of the Ferment Podcast. Thanks for listening. I got a couple quick things for you. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. We've got a bunch of exciting shows coming up, and we don't want you to miss a thing. So, on social media, you can find us on Instagram at the Ferment Podcast, and on Twitter, you can find us at FermentCast. Please let us know what you think of the podcast by leaving a review on iTunes. All right, see you next time. Peace. Here's Tina Colón Williams with the Christmas Carol medley from the Humble King EP.
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. Let heaven and nature sing. Let heaven and nature sing. Let heaven and nature sing. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. For day.